and welcome to POV, your favorite web political series. Today, we're talking big bank bailouts and an impending hunger crisis. So let's get it. Earlier this week, the Reserve Bank governor sat in front of the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee chaired by the Honourable Mr. Beatty. The governor was being questioned over the practices of a company called the Zimbabwe Asset Management Company, or Zamco. Now, when I found out that the Honourable MP would have an audience with the governor of the Reserve Bank, I thought, this one's going to turn into some jambage. And true to form, the exchange became very heated with all sorts of jabs and low blows. But if you don't know anything about Zamco, you won't know why the exchange was necessary and why inevitably it would become so heated. So let's start there. Now, in 2014, the RBZ, with the help of the IMF, set up Zamco. This company was set up specifically to take over bad debts or non-performing loans in the banking sector. Now, a non-performing loan, or NPL, is money whose scheduled payments have not been made by the debtor for a specified period. So, let's say your friend owes you $100 and they say they're going to pay you next week. If 3 months go by and they haven't paid you, they haven't given you some of it, they haven't even said anything, they've just gone Z with your sheets, in banking terms, they now have what is called an NPL. So if you can imagine how unpredictable life can become over a personal loan among friends, now imagine what it's like for banks who don't know if their creditors are going to give back money. Now, at the time the company was set up, over 20% of loans owed to the banks were these NPLs. In order to have a stable financial sector, these loans must be brought down to less than 5%. So by taking on all these debts, the RBZ had created a solution that would allow banks and choice companies to start on a clean slate. Must be nice. Now, for the most part, it did work. You see, when the peak of the NPLs was at 20.45% in 2014, in just 3 years, Zamco had dropped it to 7%. Zamco also freed banks and helped them become more profitable. But one of the most positive impacts it had on the banking sector was the introduction of a credit reference system, which helped banks make better decisions on whom to lend their money. You see, this is a very critical point, because without this, banks were just Oprah Winfrey with the loans. When we dollarized in 2009, people and companies overnight had an inflated value of what they were really worth. And with no credit reference bureau, it was impossible for banks to find out the truth about their clients. Some were overborrowed and owed multiple banks and retailers. Some borrowed money and took it out the country with no intention of bringing it back. Some companies even borrowed to expand, and they were crushed by the economy. And by 2018, Zamco had taken up an estimated $3 billion worth of debt. So why question this good and honest work? Well, in 2018, the bad loans were coming back again. In fact, at the end of last year, they had risen to 8.25%. And then further alarm was raised over the facility when the Minister of Finance ordered Zamco to stop accumulating these NPLs, stating that it was not in line with the government's plan to reduce the country's domestic debt, which left the obvious set of questions: whose debt and how did they get it? And why are they having it cleared by a state-owned private company? You see, those three questions were at the basis of the jambage. Mr. Beatty was questioning Mr. Mangwe on why the debts which Zamco accepted were not approved by Parliament, and why the central bank was always lending to the government without parliamentary approval. And more importantly, Mr. Beatty would ask, and I quote, "The Parliament also wants to know the criteria used to decide which NPLs go to Zamco, because we hear the criteria is based on political muscle, and the list of the people that have benefited from Zamco are political heavyweights, and you need to hand over the list to Parliament in 2 weeks." What is that, mister? There were individuals who were using their muscle and influence to get their debts offset through Zamco? What? You mean that there are people in Zimbabwe taking advantage of the system to offload their personal problems? And in other news, water is wet. I mean, call me cynical, but maybe I've lived in Zimbabwe too long to be shocked by this kind of stuff. But I'll tell you what did shock me, was the governor's response to Parliament's involvement. Mr. Mangwe had this to say: "The finance minister, Kuda Mangwe, brought the budget to Parliament where he was clear that he was limiting Zamco to 1 billion and no MP asked where the figures were coming from, and so it would be remiss on my part to say that Zamco figures did not come before Parliament." Imagine that. MPs, elected officials whose chief responsibility is to ensure that our best interests are not overlooked by government, didn't even do their due diligence when the issues of massive ensuing debt was going to affect us. I wonder if the minister was talking about their meals and massages, would they have been so quiet? So here's how we conclude the matter. If this list exists, it must come out. For accountability's sake, we must know who else, apart from the companies and individuals who've already been listed by Zamco, have had their bank loans taken over. Should the list of Zamco defaulters be released, we will see names of executives and individuals who are at the heart of this very serious matter. We don't want this list so that we can lambast and name shame people. We want this list because the history of creditors getting away with billions and having the taxpayer pick up the bill cannot continue. For us to get this list will be a positive sign in moving into a direction of transparency over the fixing of crippled existing systems. Now, this is a quick but very important one. In late 2018, the Famine Early Warning System Network, or FuseNet, warned that there was an increased probability of drought-induced El Niño weather conditions expected in the southern part of Africa, including Zimbabwe, during the upcoming 2018-2019 agricultural season. Cumulative seasonal rainfalls have been well below average in most areas of the region. This has negatively impacted maize production, agricultural labor opportunities, and livestock conditions, driving increases in acute food insecurity. So, what are the implications? According to the Zimbabwe Vulnerability Assessment Committee, their 2018 report estimated that 1.5 million people in rural and urban areas will require urgent food assistance. At the time of the report, communities in Matabeleland North and South, as well as Masringo, were already in urgent need of food assistance. If the situation continues, food prices will continue to increase because of the scarcity, and Lord knows what level of impact a full-blown famine will have on this country. So what are we doing about it? Now, when questioned, the government through Labor and Social Welfare Minister Sikai Nzenza assured the Senate that the country is food secure and that there's enough food to cater for every vulnerable citizen. But this is in total contradiction with the United Nations, who launched an international appeal for aid for Zimbabwe after their experts said that the drought expects to affect around 1/3 of the population as crop yields plummet. Zimbabwe's annual maize consumption is 1.8 million tons, and the Ministry of Agriculture is said to still be assessing the extent of the drought. But at the time that they're doing this, our finance minister has said that the country has 500,000 tons in strategic reserves. Where are these reserves? Because if this is true, then why, in the audience of the president himself, was the UN seeking $234 million in emergency rescue funds to assist the potential 5.3 million Zimbabweans who could be affected by this disaster? I mean, what does this government gain in always trying to paint rosy pictures where they aren't? El Niño weather conditions is a common occurrence in Zimbabwe, and surely by now we should be better prepared for these situations. I mean, here's a quick list of things our government could be doing to appease the situation. Number one, they could start investing in the development and rehabilitation of irrigation schemes around the country. Two, they could start training and transitioning farmers to adopt client-smart agricultural methods, which would help minimize the impact of droughts. Three, they could start making strides to use the unutilized land in the country. 60% of our population is under 24, and the majority do not want to be involved in agricultural pursuits. There's a chance to kill two birds with one stone, because regardless of what these youthies might feel, agriculture is still at the basis of our needs of growing the country. Number four, a faster completion of the land audit would allow us to be able to put the most qualified farmers in places where they would be able to make the most out of the situations. And lastly, how about we start taking climate change seriously? Currently, we don't have a very serious approach on climate change, but even you and I can feel that the weather is a little different. Surely we should start investigating as to the bigger picture of all of this. The bottom line is, we need to be aware and prepared and start doing something about this impending food crisis. And the last thing that we need right now is for the government to be more preoccupied with cosmetics and looking good than actually being real with us so that we can be best prepared to tackle this situation. This is Kuda Mangwe, wishing you a good morning, good afternoon, and good night. This show is nothing without your support, so please remember to subscribe. And when you've subscribed, click the bell button so that you receive notifications every time we launch an episode. And if you're on Facebook, like the page. And if you dare, follow us on Twitter.